is in fact learned. But here's the good news. If it is learned, if in fact that's true, prejudice is learned, then it can be unlearned or relearned. You can learn new things. And you hear this, well, you can't teach old dogs new tricks. My father was about as much of an old dog as anybody you would ever meet. My father was born in 1915. Women could not vote when my father was born. It was long before the Great Depression. He had a lot of really strong beliefs. And I don't know if you're familiar with All in the Family. You probably aren't, but there is. If you see some of the television, some of the television that's it's only on air, it's not on cable, you'll find that there's a thing on there called All in the Family, and there's a guy on there called Archie Bunker who is about as prejudiced as anybody you can imagine. When I was a fairly young man, I was teaching at that time, we used to call my dad Archie, and he thought it was a compliment. And we did not mean it as a compliment, because he was very, very stuck in his ways. One of the last substantive conversations I had with my father before he passed away was a discussion where he was telling me how much he liked a particular person who happened to be black. And from the discussion, I knew that this was a real learning situation for him. Because he said to me, I really like, her name was Barb. I really like Barb. I said, yes. I kind of had a feeling where it was going from the look in his eye. Now, Barb was maybe in her mid-20s, no, she was a little older than that, maybe late 30s. My dad was in his 80s. This is not an age-appropriate relationship, obviously. And he had a number of problems with, had strokes and had some problems. And one of the things that goes with a stroke is the filter. You're not always able to filter things before you say them and do them. And anyhow, he wanted to tell me how much he liked Barb, but he had trouble voicing that. He said, "But I really like her." And I said, "Yeah, she's really a nice person." Of course, I'm not giving him any place to move here on this. And he said, "But she's black." And I said, "Dad, isn't that what we've been talking about for the last 30 years? And he just smiled. My point is, it's not learned, it can be unlearned, and I believe my father was in that process, in his 80s, in his dotage, of learning some new ways of thinking. It's never too late, I guess. Now, there are a couple words that we have used here. We have not defined them. And in the class, I would have done this in much greater detail. But prejudice and oppression. Somebody help me to define those words. What is prejudice? Yes.
Is it having discriminatory type thoughts toward a group of people, or
That's a start. That's certainly a start. It's broad generalizations. Now, some of these generalizations are necessary for us. If you see a burner on a stove and it's red, the generalization is that it's what?
Hot.
Hot, caliente. You're not going to just go over and touch it. You don't have to touch it to be sure of that, correct? And so that kind of wouldn't call it prejudice, but a generalization is good. On the other hand, if you're walking down the street and there is a person, and it could be a person of color, it could be a person wearing a turban, or somebody that looks to be somewhat different from you. If you feel like you need to go across the street away from them, that's a prejudice. That's the kind of thing, you've got some real questions about. Oppression. Oppression throws in another thing. It's prejudice, but it throws in the power to enforce it. If you were to look today at the Fortune 500, I don't know the actual numbers. I know what they were a few years ago. I know that there are probably no more than 15 or 20 CEOs in the Fortune 500 companies. Fortune 500 being those companies that are the largest companies in this country, generally by worth or by income. If you look at that, there are only a few women who are CEOs. Back in the 50s, there were none. So that's changing a little bit. But if you're working in one of those companies and you're a female, there is a certain amount of oppression there. Because there is somewhat of a prejudice. How many times? Well, I don't know how many times. I will tell you how many times I've heard some of these things. Well, that's the way women are. I guess I wouldn't get away with saying that in here because I look around. Yeah, that's the way they are. I can remember that one of the things that I did when I was I had to work with a group of folks and work out a seating chart because this group was an office group, and they were moving from one floor to another floor, and they had a little more space in the second place. And I remember adjusting. They asked me to help work so that we'd get the workflow to make some sense. And I remember when I first put out the adjusted seating chart, so to speak, someone said, "Well, you don't want all those women together, do you?" I said, "Why not?" And they said, "Well, you know how women are. They'll be gossiping, they won't get anything done, they will..." I was fairly young at the time, and to be very honest with you, some of that made sense to me. It doesn't make as much sense today as it did then. But that is oppression. And I want to say something about oppression. You didn't invent it. I didn't invent it. And although I may have been a recipient of the benefits of that oppression as a white male, I didn't invent it, and therefore I can't take credit or blame for it. Not complete credit and blame. If it happens in my hearing and I don't do anything about it, then maybe it is going on in my name, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Some more words that we need to title or need to describe. Each of us has had the experience of being a target of oppression as well as that of being privileged. Two groups, privileged group, target group. When we talk about race in this country, who's the privileged group? Whites. Who's the target group? People of color. There's some other privileged groups. Christian.
Male.
Privileged group, male. Target group, female. Okay.
Straight.
Straight. Privileged group. Target group.
Not straight.
Or those who are perceived to not be straight.
Right.
We target folks who may be straight, we don't know, but we think they're not. Oh, well, he's gay, she's gay. Now let's get to what this says. Each of us has had the experience of being a target of oppression as well as that of being privileged. In different settings, we may find ourselves to be in different groups. If you are white, you'll find yourself to be in a white privilege group. There is some privilege associated with being white. There are assumptions that are made in this society about white people that we don't necessarily extend to people of color. If you are a white woman, you find that you win on the white side, right? You are one of the privileged, but you lose on the gender side because you're a woman. That's what I mean by each of us has had the experience of being in both of these, both the target of oppression as well as that of being privileged. This is one that sometimes people have trouble with. Oppression hurts us all. You say, well, how does it hurt the privileged? Let me give you an example. Some years ago, and it's a good many years ago now, I was walking down the street. It was dark in Pittsburgh. And I had a habit of walking fairly fast. I have to tell you that at a certain point in my life, that habit has gone the other way. I no longer walk so fast. But I used to walk very fast. And I'm walking down the street, and I'm kind of conscious of the fact that there's a person in front of me, but I'm not thinking about that much at all. That person happens to be there. Person happened to be a woman, I'm a male. As I started to catch up to this person, I noticed she was walking faster and faster. Now here I am, a person in the privileged group, in that case, the male-female thing, but I'm being targeted in a way, well, this is a guy, right? I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know what he's thinking. Why is he walking faster? Why is he catching up to me? I don't know what all was going on in her mind. Maybe she was in a hurry, but she almost broke into a run. And I remember slowing down and thinking, I don't want to scare this person. So that's just one example. Oppression always hurts us. If we oppress people in business, and we don't hire those people, we miss getting the skills that they might have. Now this is one. We may want to think about all oppression and prejudices have the same root causes. What do you think they are? Give me one.
Fear.
Fear. After 9/11, and I know for most of you 9/11 is ancient history. After 9/11, we as a country went into the fear mode. And frankly, we haven't gotten out of it altogether to this day. We fear Islam. We fear the whole idea of the Quran and so on and so forth. Largely because we don't know that much about it. When I was in a conversation just a few weeks ago with a friend who was, and I really like this guy a lot, and we were talking about a member of the Islamic faith, and this friend of mine said, "Well, how does he answer it when you say, but all the guys who flew those planes into the towers were Islamic?" And I said, "You know, I don't know. I never asked him that. But I will ask you a question. How does it make you feel that Hitler was a Christian?" What I'm trying...
That's
Comment?
brilliant. I've never thought about it that way. That's...
Well, it's not original with me, I have to tell you that.
Oh.
Yes.
I was thinking Timothy McVeigh,
Timothy McVeigh, perfect example. Christian,
American.
You know, what's not to like? Well, maybe the fact that he killed 260 some people without any regard for anything. Fear is one of the biggest root causes of prejudice. And you may think that the KKK doesn't have any adherents anymore. Well, they don't have a lot, but if you have nothing to do some night, look up stormfront.com. It is unbelievable. I don't suggest you do it where anybody can see, look over your shoulder, because if you're in the library, they may want to put you, want to question what you're doing. And again, that's a prejudice, but I'll tell you an experience I had just this past week. I was looking for a particular place in New Cumberland, Pennsylvania. I have been to this place twice before and can't find it. It's one of those, I don't know if you ever had one of those places you just sort of, you go and you think, the first time I went, somebody else drove. Second time I drove but had to ask for directions. Now I'm going again and I don't remember the directions. And my daughter will probably say something about age, and I'm going to fail her in the course that she does. Anyhow, my point is that I was asking directions, and somebody said, "Have you been to the post office?" And I said, "No, I hadn't thought about that." Just don't know why I didn't think about it. So I make a turn and I go back, and in front of the post office in New Cumberland, if any of you are familiar with it, has about probably 50 yards in front of it. It's a wide building, and the first thing I see when I get there, or close there, is these posters, which were at least 4 feet high and maybe 3 feet wide, with the picture of President Obama on it. with a mustache. A Hitler-style mustache. And it says underneath it, Obama must go. It didn't say we should impeach him. It didn't say there's things that he's doing that we need to really argue against. Must go. I didn't know quite what that meant. I'm not sure that everybody who looked at it took it the same way either. I mean, that can be pretty dangerous. Must go. Fear. I went out and I talked to these gentlemen. My wife I always kid my wife about this, and we'll see one of the Confederate battle flags somewhere. And I'll say to my wife, and I'm going to quote this, I wonder if that guy knows that flying that flag makes him look like an asshole. Maybe I should go and tell him, because, you know, and my wife is grabbing my arm by this time.
I like your other one. Maybe I ought to ask them, were they all out of swastikas? Is that why they're flying that instead?
Okay. The point that I'm trying to make here is that it's fear that gets us into that mode. Yes.